Your son's savings, $4,600, covered your nephew's dental bills. You understand it's family. Dad said over dinner like it was already done. My son was 9. He'd saved that money since he was 6. I put my fork down, opened my banking app, transferred $4,600 back from the family joint account into my son's personal account, stood up, said, "It's family, so am I," walked out, 29 missed calls before I got home. Dad left an angry voicemail that was 4 minutes and 38 seconds long. Dinner at my parents' house always looked like a catalog photo and felt like a trap. Warm lights, cloth napkins. My mom's special roast. My dad sitting at the head of the table like he owned the air. My sister's family squeezed in on one side, my son and me on the other, like we were the extra chairs that were still polite enough to show up. My name's Nathan. I'm 34, a project manager, and I've spent most of my adult life trying to keep everyone calm. At work, that skill pays my bills. At home, it's how I got trained to accept things that shouldn't be accepted. That night, my son, Evan, sat with his hands in his lap, shoulders a little tight. He was 9. He'd been saving money since he was 6. Birthday cash, tooth fairy money, dollars from returning bottles with me on Saturdays. He didn't spend much. He liked watching the number grow. He called it my goal money. It was $4,600. He'd saved it for a tablet and a summer camp he'd been talking about for months. He'd even written it on a piece of paper and taped it to his wall like a little contract with himself. We were halfway through dinner when my dad cleared his throat in that theatrical way he does when he wants the room to turn toward him. He didn't ask a question. He announced a decision. Your nephew's dental bills got handled, he said, cutting into his roast like he was discussing the weather. The savings account covered it. You understand, it's family. I blinked. What savings account? Dad didn't look up. The one you set up. The family joint. The one you put money into. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I looked at my sister. She didn't look guilty. She looked relieved. Like something heavy had been placed down and she didn't care whose back it landed on. My mom said softly. It was urgent, Nathan. My nephew Caleb, who was 11, kept eating like nothing had happened. My sister's husband stared at his plate. Evan's eyes flicked to me. Quick, quiet. The way kids look when they're trying to figure out if they're allowed to speak. Dad finally looked up. It was just sitting there. I heard my own voice come out slow. That money wasn't just sitting there. That was Evan's savings. Dad shrugged. Same thing. You're his father. You'll replace it. Evan's face went pale in a way that made my stomach drop. He didn't cry. He didn't get loud. He just looked confused, like the rules of the world had changed without telling him. Dad went on, still calm, still eating. Caleb needed it. Teeth aren't optional. I put my fork down carefully, like if I moved too fast, I'd break something. I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and opened my banking app. My dad didn't notice at first. I scrolled to the family joint account, the one I'd created years ago because my parents kept forgetting bills and my sister's emergencies were always one step away from disaster. I had it set up so I could transfer money quickly when something came up. The balance was lower than it should have been. I tapped into recent transfers. There it was. $4,600 moved out. My chest went tight. I didn't argue. I didn't beg for understanding. I didn't even raise my voice. I tapped transfer. I moved $4,600 back out of the family joint account and into Evan's personal account. Then I locked the joint account access from my end. I stood up. Dad finally looked at me, annoyed. Sit down. I looked at him and said clear and steady, it's family, so am I. I took Evan's coat, helped him into it with hands that were steadier than I felt, and we walked out. By the time I got home, there were 29 missed calls. And one voicemail from my dad, 4 minutes and 38 seconds long. Here's the part that makes people ask, why did you even have a family joint account? Because I used to believe being reliable was the same as being loved. I grew up in a house where my dad's word was final. Not because he yelled all the time, but because he spoke like the judge and everyone else was just there to agree. My sister, Kara, was always the sensitive one, the overwhelmed one, the one who needed help. I was the capable one, which sounds like a compliment until you realize it's just a nicer way of saying you don't get to need anything. When I got my first real job out of college, my dad called it proof I was a man now. What he meant was, I was now eligible to solve problems that weren't mine. It started small. Can you cover your sister's car insurance for a month? Can you spot mom until payday? Can you just put it on your card? We'll pay you back. They did sometimes. Other times it turned into a story about how I was being cold or counting pennies or forgetting we're family. So I got smarter. I created the joint account as a system because systems make me feel safe. The account wasn't meant to be a free-for-all. It was meant to keep things organized. I transferred money in when something came up, then transferred it out when it was settled. But over time, it became normal for my parents to treat it like it was their emergency drawer. And then, last year, Evan started saving seriously. He's not a reckless kid. He's careful. He likes plans. He likes control. He's the kind of kid who counts his money twice and puts it back in the same envelope. One Saturday, he asked, "Can I have a bank account like yours?" I said yes because I was proud of him. We went to the bank. They treated him like a tiny adult. He signed his name carefully. He got a debit card that he kept in a special spot in his room like it was a medal. From then on, every time he got money, he'd ask me to deposit it. Can we put it in the account? How much do I have now? How long until I hit 5,000? I watched him learn something I didn't learn until much later. Saving is power. And I didn't realize how much that would bother my family until they noticed it. A few weeks ago, my mom had asked casually, "How much has Evan saved now?" I remember Evan glancing at me like he wasn't sure if he should answer. I should have shut it down right then, but I didn't. Evan said, "Proud, 4,600. My dad smiled in that way people smile when they've just found out there's money nearby. "That's a lot for a kid," he said. Kara laughed. "Must be nice." I remember feeling a small flash of discomfort. It was subtle, but it was there, like a warning light. Then came Caleb's dental situation. My sister called me 2 days before the dinner. Her voice was tight. "Caleb needs work done. A lot. The dentist said we can't wait." "Okay," I said, already mentally calculating. "How much?" "Like a few thousand." I asked what insurance would cover. She said not enough. She said they were already behind on other things. She said the payment plan was insane. Then she did the thing she always does, made it sound like a natural conclusion. "So we might need help." I said, "I can contribute something, but I need details. I'm not just sending money into the air." She got quiet, then sharp. "Why do you always make it so hard?" "Because I'm tired, Kara. Because I don't trust vague numbers anymore. Because I've watched you call emergencies what other people call consequences." But I didn't say that. I said, "Send me the estimate." She never did. Then my dad texted, "We'll handle it." I assumed handle it meant they'd take a loan, or work a payment plan, or ask me for a specific amount like adults. I didn't realize handle it meant they'd already decided which pocket to reach into. Evan's. When we got home, Evan went straight to his room without taking off his shoes. That's how I knew he was trying not to fall apart. I followed him in and sat on the edge of his bed. He held his debit card in his hand like it was proof he hadn't imagined it. "Dad," he said, voice small, "did Grandpa take my money?" I took a slow breath. "Grandpa moved it." Evan swallowed. "Why?" "Because your grandpa thinks money belongs to whoever can claim it first. Because your aunt has learned that being loud gets her rescued. Because I didn't shut this down sooner." What I said was, "They thought they were helping Caleb." Evan's eyes got wet. "But that was my money." "I know," I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. He stared at the floor. "I saved it." "I know you did." He blinked hard. "Am I not family?" That one hit like a punch. I moved closer. "You are family. You are my family. And what happened was not okay." Evan's voice went thin. "Are you going to get it back?" "I already did," I said, and I turned my phone toward him and showed him the balance in his account. His shoulders dropped like he'd been holding them up for hours. Relief flooded his face, then something else. "But are they going to take it again?" "No," I said, and this time the word came out firm. "They can't. Not anymore." He looked at me like he wanted to believe me but didn't know how. That's when my phone started ringing again. "Dad." I didn't answer. I listened to the voicemail. It wasn't one continuous scream. It was worse. Controlled anger, wrapped in righteousness. He called me disrespectful. He said I embarrassed him. He said, You don't take money back once it's used, Nathan. That's not how family works. He said, you're teaching your son to be selfish. He said, if Caleb loses those teeth, that's on you. I replayed that last part twice, just to make sure I heard it right. Then I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my hands like I didn't recognize my own life. Evan was in his room, quiet, and I realized something I didn't want to admit. My dad wasn't angry because I transferred money. He was angry because I broke the rule. The rule was, they decide, I comply. I texted my mom first, because she's the one who tries to soften everything. Me. Did you know Dad was planning to use Evan's savings? Mom, it was an emergency. Me, it was my child's money. Mom, Nathan, please don't do this tonight. I stared at please don't do this like it meant, please don't make us face what we did. Then Kara texted, Kara, so you really took it back? Are you serious? Me, it wasn't yours. Kara, it's for my kids' teeth. Me, and that's your responsibility. Kara, wow, Evan has money sitting there and you're acting like we robbed a bank. Me, you did rob him, just quietly. She called immediately. I answered because I was tired of the indirect stuff. What? I said. Her voice came out hot. Caleb is in pain and you're acting like a villain over numbers. Don't, I said. Don't what? Don't try to make my son the solution to your life, I said. And the words surprised me with how clean they sounded. She scoffed. He's 9. Exactly, I said. He's 9, and he's been saving since he was 6. Do you understand what kind of kid saves like that? Silence. Then she went low. So what, you're punishing Caleb to teach us a lesson? No, I said. I'm protecting Evan. She snapped. Must be nice to have money. I almost laughed. Almost. Because it wasn't nice. It was work. It was me choosing the cheaper phone plan, skipping trips, packing lunches, saying no to things I wanted. It was me budgeting like a machine so my kid could feel safe. Kara said, Dad said you'd replace it anyway. I felt my throat tighten. So you already knew. She didn't deny it. I ended the call. Then I did something I should have done a long time ago. I opened my laptop, and I looked at every single place I'd made myself a backup plan for my family. The joint account, the auto transfers, the saved payees, the shared access, all of it. And one by one, I shut the doors. The next morning, I took Evan to school like normal. He was quiet in the car, staring out the window, the kind of quiet kids get when they're carrying something too big for them. Right before he got out, he said, Are they mad at me? That's when I realized how deep it went. He thought he had caused it just by saving money. I looked at him. No, they're mad at me. He hesitated. Because you picked me? I swallowed. Yes, I said, because I picked you. He nodded slowly like that made sense and scared him at the same time. Then he got out and walked into school like he was trying to act normal. I sat in the parking lot for a minute after he was gone. Then I drove straight to the bank. I didn't do it for drama. I did it because I needed it to be real in the way paperwork is real. I closed the family joint account. Not paused, not changed passwords. Closed. The banker asked if there was a reason, and I just said, access issue. Then I opened a new savings account for Evan under a structure that didn't allow anyone but me to touch it. No shared links, no shortcuts, no family convenience. On the way out, my phone rang again. Dad. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mom. Then Kara. By lunchtime, I had messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. Aunt Linda, your father is heartbroken. Cousin Mark, dude, what are you doing? Uncle Ray, family helps family. I didn't respond to any of them because I knew the pattern. They only cared when my no disrupted their comfort. That evening, my dad showed up at my apartment. He didn't knock softly. He pounded like he was the police. Evan froze in the living room, mid-homework. I walked to the door and opened it just enough to stand in the gap. Dad stepped forward like he was about to push past me. I didn't move. He stared at me, jaw tight. We need to talk, I said. Not in front of Evan. Dad glanced past me, saw Evan watching, and didn't soften. That was the part that used to crush me, the lack of softness. He said, You stole money from the family. I almost smiled. You mean I took my son's money back? Dad's eyes flashed. That money was already spent. That's not my problem, I said. His voice rose. Do you hear yourself? That's your nephew. That's your sister. And that's my son, I said, and my voice stayed level. And you took from him without asking. Dad threw his hands out. Because it was urgent. You still ask, I said, especially when it's a child's savings. Dad leaned closer. You don't understand what it means to be family. I stared at him and thought, I understand exactly what you think it means. It means the strongest voice wins. It means the most chaotic person gets rescued. It means the responsible one gets drained because they're stable enough to survive it. I said, family doesn't mean you get access to my child. Dad's face hardened. So what now? You're cutting us off? I took a breath. I'm setting boundaries. He laughed, sharp and ugly. Boundaries. That's what people say when they're selfish. Evan shifted behind me. I could feel his presence like a small heartbeat in the room. I said, you can call it whatever you want. You don't get to take Evan's savings. Ever again. Dad's voice dropped into that dangerous calm. So Caleb can just suffer? I held his stare. No, you and Kara can figure it out like adults. His eyes narrowed. You think you're better than us. No, I said. I think you're used to me. That landed. For a second, he looked like he might actually hear me. Then his pride snapped back into place like armor. He pointed a finger at me. You embarrassed me at my table, I said. Good. He flinched like I'd slapped him. You can't talk to me like that, he said. I can, I said. I'm doing it right now. Mom appeared behind him on the walkway, breathless, like she'd followed him in a panic. She looked at me, eyes shiny. Nathan, please. I felt something in me soften toward her and then harden again because she'd been there. She'd watched it happen. I said, Mom, Evan asked me last night if he's not family. Her face changed. That one hit her. She whispered, Oh, honey. Dad cut in fast. Don't manipulate your mother. I looked at Dad. You did that all by yourself. Mom stepped closer. Nathan, we didn't mean, I interrupted gently. You didn't mean to hurt him, but you didn't mean to protect him either. Silence. Then Kara's car pulled up. Of course. She got out fast, already crying like she'd rehearsed it. She stormed up the steps. How could you do this to me? I didn't answer immediately. I waited until she looked at Evan behind me, because I wanted her to see him, not as an extension of me, as a kid. She glanced at him for half a second, then back to me. Caleb is in pain. I said, Then pay the bill, her voice cracked. With what? And there it was, the real question. Not, is this right? Just, where do I get the money now? I said, not from my child. Kara stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Dad said, you'd rather hoard money than help. I felt my chest burn. It's not hoarding. It's Evan's. Kara's tears turned into anger. He's 9. He doesn't need that much. Evan flinched. That did it. I opened the door wider and stepped out onto the walkway so Evan couldn't hear the next part as clearly. I said, low and sharp, do not ever say what my son needs. You don't get that role. Kara's mouth opened. Dad started talking over her. I raised my hand. Stop, I said. They actually stopped because they weren't used to me doing that. I looked at all of them, Dad, Mom, Kara, and I said, here's what's going to happen. You will not have access to any account connected to me. You will not discuss Evan's money again. If you need help, you ask me directly, with numbers, with a plan, and you accept that I might say no. Dad scoffed. So we have to beg now? I said, no, you have to respect me. Mom started crying quietly. Nathan, I softened my tone just a little. I love you. But love doesn't mean you get to cross my kid. Dad stepped back like he was disgusted. You've changed. I said no, I've finally caught up. Then I turned, went inside, and closed the door. For a week, I got the cold treatment. No calls from Mom. No, checking in. Just silence and a few distant relatives sending messages like I'd committed a crime. Evan asked once, are we going to see Grandpa again? I told him the truth in a way a 9-year-old could carry. Maybe, I said, but only if Grandpa can be kind and fair. Evan nodded like he understood. Then he said, I don't want my money to make people mad. That broke me a little, because money wasn't what made them mad. Control was. I sat with him on the couch and said, "Your money didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. Adults are supposed to handle their own problems. You don't have to fix grown-ups." He leaned into me and whispered, "Okay." 2 weeks later, Mom finally called. Her voice sounded tired. Older. "Nathan," she said softly, "we're figuring it out." I didn't celebrate. I didn't rub it in. I just said good. She hesitated. "Your father is still angry." "I know," I said. Then she said quieter, "But when you said Evan asked if he's family, I haven't stopped thinking about it." I didn't respond right away, because that was the first time she'd ever acknowledged the emotional cost instead of just the financial situation. Mom said, "I'm sorry. I should have stopped it." My throat tightened. "Yes," I said, "you should have." She didn't argue. She just breathed. Then she said, "Can I talk to Evan?" I looked at my son across the room, building something out of blocks, focused and calm. I said, "You can, but not about money, not about guilt. Just be his grandma." Mom agreed quickly, like she knew it was a test. Evan took the phone. He listened. He answered politely. He didn't mention the savings. He didn't need to. Kids don't want power. They want safety. After the call, he handed the phone back and said, "Grandma sounded sad." I said, "Sometimes adults get sad when they realize they were wrong." He thought about that and said, "Does Grandpa realize?" I looked at the wall for a second. "I don't know," I admitted. "But even if he doesn't, we still protect what's ours." That night, I opened Evan's savings app with him and showed him something new. A second goal. Not just tablet. Not just camp. A line that said, "My future is mine." He smiled a little, and it wasn't about money. It was about control. It was about trust. And that's the thing I wish I'd learned earlier. Boundaries aren't punishment. They're clarity. They tell people where you end and where they begin. My dad always taught me, family means you give until there's nothing left. I'm teaching my son something different. Family means you protect the smallest person at the table, even if the loudest person gets angry. Especially then.